So with Module 5, we're going to talk about vehicle automation. We've all been hearing about automated and autonomous vehicles, but what's that going to have in terms of impacts on our energy use and our emissions? So just to sort of recap what's been happening is that we have new companies, Google, as well as the automotive manufacturers that are getting more and more into automation. They're using the latest technology, radar, LiDAR systems, computer vision, and other things to make our vehicles more and more automated and less reliant on human driving. You've probably heard of many different levels, where level 0 is where we're at now with 100% human control, and we're on the pathway of going through partial automation with level 1, level 2, and eventually we're going to get to these level 3, 4s, and 5s, where 5 is where we're completely automated and there's no interaction between the passenger and the vehicle itself. You just simply tell the vehicle where you want to go and the vehicle does the rest. So there's been quite a bit of activity and a few demonstrations of this in the recent years. One thing that we always like to point out is maybe a slight difference between an autonomous vehicle and an automated vehicle. An autonomous vehicle relies more on sensors in order to accomplish these different tasks about staying in the lane, making turns, not running into other obstacles, and that works very successfully. But if you want to solve longer and longer traffic issues, you need to have that communication aspect. So we often want to push this towards being connected and having this automation, as opposed to having a bunch of vehicles with just sensors. We want to have that cooperation. If you do that, you're going to have a lot better mobility, things will be safer, and we can gain a lot more in terms of energy reductions and emission reductions. One of the potential downfalls of automation is what we call explosion of various uses. We drive a certain amount now, and it's certainly a lot of driving, but think about if everybody had an automated vehicle, it's pretty certain that our amount of travel would certainly increase. We would make more trips. Maybe as we perform an errand, the vehicle circles the block, maybe sending the kids off to soccer. These are all things where it'd be a lot easier to make those trips, and therefore it's been predicted that the amount of driving would certainly go up if everything was automated. So that's a significant concern, and it has to be studied more to see what those actual effects are. But then we already talked about operational effects. If you do things properly, you can decrease greenhouse gas emissions. You can reduce congestion. You can do more of this traffic smoothing. You can do better speed management. And if you do that as a whole across the board for all the vehicles, that can be a very significant energy and less greenhouse gas emissions. This graph is from a recent paper that shows everything on the left side of that middle bar are all the different things that could improve in terms of less energy use, less emissions. And it talks about things like crash avoidance and looking at mitigating congestion and things like that. And everything on the right side are things such as the extra trips that we might make with this automation at hand. So really it's a balance, right? We want to have the system operation improvements, but we also want to hopefully manage the number of trips that we do, and therefore don't let it get out of control in terms of these additional trips, which would cause more emissions. And then automation applies across the board. We often just think about cars driving by themselves, but it applies to the powertrain and how we operate our vehicles, especially things like hybrid electric vehicles. The vehicle dynamics, we often talk about the speed smoothing, and then traffic flow. There's ways of automating that through the intersections down corridors. And then eventually, I think our infrastructure is going to change too. Our roadways, the lanes might be skinnier because we can control our vehicles a little bit better. And then we might get rid of some things like the standard traffic signal intersection might change in terms of how we get vehicles through those different types of intersections. So I think automation is going to be here obviously for a long, long time, and there's a lot of potential changes in our future. So if you look at vehicle automation as a whole from a greenhouse gas perspective, we have to be careful. I think there's a lot of things we can do that will reduce greenhouse gases, save energy, but we need to be careful when it comes to that extra vehicle travel, and we need to be able to manage that as we deploy these type of vehicles. It's really what we call the induced demand effect. We don't want to induce more demand on our roadways. So as a summary of our lecture, we've learned a little bit about the relationship between energy, emissions, air quality with transportation and how those things go together. And then we looked at solutions. We talked about intelligent transportation systems, how it's designed for safety, mobility, and reducing energy. But then we're also talking about vehicle automation. So hopefully you have an idea of how those things relate. And as those things deploy into the future, we'll have to keep an eye on it in terms of reducing our greenhouse gas emissions.